Business Leadership South Africa has welcomed the President's plans to help solve the country's power crisis. It says strong regulations need to be imposed to ensure funds embarked for Eskom are properly utilised. Joining me now is the Chief Executive of Business Leadership South Africa, Busi Mavuso. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Ms. Mavuso. And I mean, I've mentioned it in my intro that you've broadly welcomed the announcement that was made by the President yesterday, but many stakeholders who've started weighing in on the conversation that the President started are asking, is it not a little too late? Have stakeholders not been calling for this for far too long, and only now the government is catching that wake-up call?
Good evening, Rofiwa, and thank you very much for inviting me. So, Rofiwa, I think my view and my response to that, I would say that better late than never. Yes, this is something that we've been calling for, precisely as business and I think other stakeholders, because when we look at what energy reform should look like in South Africa, we were mistaken as a country to think that Eskom will equal energy security, especially because we knew, what type of Eskom we inherited after the Jacob Zuma leadership. We knew very well that Eskom was actually the main entity that was targeted, through the state capture project. We knew that there was a very deliberate and intentional attempt to actually hollow out Eskom, hollow out its resources, and hollow out its skills. And we are basically suffering precisely the damage that has been done to Eskom in the past 15 years. And I think the President has actually spoken at length about this yesterday when he took us back to the 1998 white paper, which actually and actually acknowledged some of the mistakes that were done then, acknowledged the mistakes of actually delaying or avoiding to do maintenance. And now we are sitting with this fleet of generation capacity that is actually unable to provide and actually give the required energy security in the country as well. But I think we definitely welcome the plan. It is brilliant that we are now here as government. I really think that the President's plan has been bold, and I really think that we need to acknowledge the courageous leadership that he has actually shown in terms of implementing this plan. I think the plan realizes and acknowledges, Ropiwa, that energy is serious to South Africa. It recognizes that if we don't seriously intervene and address the issue of energy, we are actually going to continue, in the same trajectory that we've actually found ourselves in, at least in the last 15 years. If we are serious about growing this economy, so that we can arrest the 46% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, this plan acknowledges, that the energy intervention and the energy security is actually going to be the key that unlocks that much required economic activity, as well as the investment that we so desperately need as a country to be able to change our economic trajectory.
There are unions that have weighed in, Ms. Mavuso, who do not want anyone to access that key that you say will unlock South Africa's economic potential, because they are saying all of these private stakeholders that will be coming on board are eventually going to remove all the business from Eskom, and therefore workers' jobs are at a threat. Your views on what the unions have weighed in here, and really how we strike a balance in terms of ensuring that we are able to introduce all this alternative power, grow the economy, and instead of losing jobs, grow them, as you've mentioned, when referring to that expanded definition that you've spoken about.
I think the President spoke very well yesterday. Ropiwa, he referred to common sense regulations. He said that if we see that we're in a crisis situation, we don't need a state of disaster to enable us as government to be able to do what needs to be done. He says some of these things are common sense regulations. So it therefore doesn't matter what any stakeholder thinks. It doesn't matter if Labour doesn't think that this is a good idea. Let's appreciate, and I think let's recognize that this is what South Africa needs at the moment. Rofiwa, the stage 6 load shedding that we experienced as a country costed us 1.5 billion rands per day. So I think it's a function of weighing the options. Do you continue to subject the country to that? Do you continue to subject SMMEs, to closure because of load shedding, and therefore continuing to shed more jobs in the economy? Do you continue to actually do nothing, because that is also a strategy, and actually watch the economy continue to dissipate and actually, get into an economic rut, that we actually find ourselves in? Or do you actually intervene? If Eskom is not in a position to actually provide the country the required energy security, what do? I think this is not about terror. This is not about ideology. I know that some of these people who are saying these things come from the developmental state ideology, but this is bigger than ideology. These are 60 million people's lives that we are gambling with. So if you continue not intervening because you are worried that you're actually going to be upsetting labor unions, honestly, for me, that's neither here nor there. Eskom cannot intervene, Rofua, precisely because they don't have the balance sheet to can actually build new power stations if that is what is required. But even if they had the balance sheet to build new power stations, how long does building a new power station take? And government also cannot intervene in terms of giving Eskom the required resources to can actually, be able to plug the 6 gigawatts gap of energy that we have in the country. So in absence of government and Eskom having the resources to actually address this crisis, you therefore look to the next stakeholder and to the next logical conclusion or a solution, which is actually going to be able to give you the solution that you require. And I think that is precisely what government has done. The private sector and the interventions that have been put in place are not going to be able to replace Eskom, not by far. Eskom still provides 90% of the electricity. And I think even that may, reduce over time. It's always going to stay high. I think at the moment we are just responding to the fact that Eskom cannot do what we needed to do as a country, which is give us the electricity that is required. And we're looking at what, therefore, are the alternatives. This is done the world over. Why should it be an anomaly when South Africa adopts the same approach, which is a reasonable approach, by the way, common sense regulations, as the president has said.
Mm-hmm. What does the BLSA take away as the most significant part of the president's plan? What many would have found interesting is the fact that there are different departments that have now come together, including the SAPS, to alleviate the huge pressures that have befallen on Eskom. And it was a very encouraging move to see that there are various governmental stakeholders that are going to be hands on deck. But for BLSA, what would you say is some of the biggest component of this plan that must happen without fail or delay?
So I think all the 4 elements of the plan, are as important, Rofua. So I think the acceleration of procurement on new generation capacity so that we can make sure that we close bid windows 5 and bid windows 6, because when you look at why those bid windows have not been closed, you will see that, there is about 2.6 gigawatts, if I'm not mistaken, that are actually sitting there, but we cannot access because we have actually failed to close those bid windows. And I think the president has said, let's look at what is preventing us from closing those bid windows and let's see how we can actually expedite their closure. I definitely think that the lifting of the license exemption for self-generation, to an unlimited number of megawatts, because remember it was 100 megawatts before, now it's unlimited number of megawatts, is absolutely a brilliant move, because there are a lot of investors, there are a lot of, local companies as well who are interested, in coming into the energy space, and now they've actually been given that opportunity. Fixing Eskom is absolutely critical, but I think my issue with that, Rofua, and I must say that I love what the president has done in terms of trying to put some form of control measures to ensure that we can actually deliver on the fixing Eskom part. That is going to be important because Eskom as it sits now, unfortunately, continues to be a crime scene. Eskom as it sits now continues to be the ground zero for the state capture project that continues to happen in this country. So I worry, therefore, if we talk about increasing the budget for maintenance, to Eskom, when we haven't done much about fixing the environment within Eskom. Because if you give more money to Eskom while the status quo still prevails, while it continues to be a crime scene that it is today, it means that half of that money is not actually going to be spent for its intended purpose. It's actually going to end up in someone else's coffers. But I think to that end, the president has brought in the issue of law enforcement, of the law enforcement team, to deal with some of the fraud and sabotage that we're actually facing at Eskom. But I think the control environment is going to have to be tightened beyond the labor enforcement team. And I know that Andre and team are actually seized with making sure that we provide that safe environment for these funds to actually come through to Eskom.
Ms. Mavuso, always great sharing your insights with you. Busi Mavuso there, who is the CEO of the Business Leadership South Africa, giving her insights on the plan that was delivered by President Cyril Ramaphosa, and she says that it's going to unlock us